Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm going to tell you about the day I learned that all those folklore books I read in college weren't just academic bullshit after all. See, I'm what the other rangers like to call the professor, and not in a good way. While they're out there wrestling bears and tracking poachers with their bare hands, I'm the guy with a master's degree in environmental science who actually reads the incident reports instead of just filing them. They all figured a guy like me had no business in the wilderness, that I belonged behind a desk in some university somewhere, analyzing data and writing papers nobody would ever read. Well, turns out all that useless reading I did about regional folklore, indigenous legends, and historical disappearances was about to save more than just my career. It was gonna save a life. This happened back in October 2011, right when the leaves were turning and the pine barrens were looking like something out of a postcard. If postcards could capture the kind of eerie beauty that makes your skin crawl for reasons you can't quite explain. I'd been stationed at the Pine Barrens for about 3 years by then, long enough to know every trail, every landmark, every weird local story about the Jersey Devil and witch covens that the old-timers loved to share after a few beers. Most of the veteran rangers just rolled their eyes at that stuff, but me? I documented it all. Called it cultural preservation in my reports, though I'll admit I was genuinely fascinated by the patterns I kept noticing. The morning everything went to hell started like any other. I was at the ranger station, updating trail condition reports on my laptop when my iPhone started buzzing. Brand new phone. Still getting used to having the internet in my pocket, though the reception out here was spotty as hell. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. Pine Barrens Ranger Station, Jake Morrison speaking. Oh, thank God someone answered. The voice was female, middle-aged, and shaking with barely controlled panic. My daughter, she's missing. Jessica Lynn Torres. She was supposed to check in yesterday evening, but her phone goes straight to voicemail. I grabbed a pen and started taking notes, old habit from all those research projects. When did you last hear from her, ma'am? Saturday morning. She was doing some kind of research project. Said she'd be back by Sunday evening at the latest. She's a graduate student at Rutgers studying... God, I don't even remember what she called it. Something about plant adaptation in wetland environments. The woman's voice broke slightly. She's my baby, Mr. Morrison. My brilliant, beautiful baby who calls me every single day just to say she loves me. She's never missed a check-in, not once in 22 years. That's when I felt that first little chill run down my spine. Not from fear, but from recognition. I'd been tracking patterns in these woods for 3 years, and disappearances of young researchers, especially around the old growth areas, had a disturbing frequency that nobody wanted to talk about. What's your name, ma'am? Maria Torres. I'm here with my husband Carlos and our younger daughter Sophia. We drove down from Princeton as soon as we realized... She took a shaky breath. Mr. Morrison, you have to understand something about my Jessica. She's not just some careless college kid. She's the one who taught herself to read when she was 4 because she was tired of waiting for bedtime stories. She's the one who spent her entire spring break last year volunteering at animal shelters instead of going to Cancun with her friends. She's the light of our family, the one who holds us all together. And there it was, that thing I'd learned to recognize in 3 years of search and rescue calls. It wasn't just worry I was hearing. It was pure, desperate love. The kind of love that makes parents drive 3 hours in the middle of the night because their kid missed one phone call. The kind of love that would make a family camp out at a ranger station until their daughter came home. We'll find her, I heard myself saying, though at that point I had no idea what I was promising. Can you meet me at the station? I need to get some more details about where she was planning to research. We're already in the parking lot. When I stepped outside, I could see them through the glass doors of the station. A middle-aged Hispanic couple holding onto a teenage girl who looked like a younger version of the photo they'd thrust into my hands the moment I walked up. The missing girl, Jessica, had long dark hair, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a smile that even in a still photograph seemed to radiate warmth. She was supposed to call last night at 9 p.m., the father Carlos told me in a voice tight with control. Every Sunday, same time for the past 4 years since she started college. "Papa," she'd say, "just checking in with my favorite man." Never missed it once, not even when she had the flu. The younger sister, Sophia, looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. She promised to take me shopping for homecoming dresses next weekend. Jessica never breaks promises. Never. I looked at the research proposal Jessica had emailed to the forestry department, something I'd actually approved myself 2 weeks earlier, though I barely remembered it among the dozens of similar requests we got every semester. She'd wanted to study plant adaptation patterns in the deeper sections of the Pine Barrens, specifically around the old Batstow village area, where the forest was oldest and least disturbed by human activity. That should have been my first red flag. The Batstow area was where most of our unusual incident reports originated from. But I'd approved it because Jessica's research proposal was thorough, well documented, and showed a level of preparation that impressed even my academic sensibilities. She'd done her homework on the local ecosystem, had proper equipment, and had even researched the historical significance of the area. Maybe too much research, as it turned out. "Mr. Morrison," Maria Torres said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "I know you probably get calls like this all the time, and maybe you think we're just overprotective parents, but you have to understand, Jessica is our heart. She's the one who still calls me every morning before class just to say good morning. She's the one who sends her little sister funny pictures to cheer her up when she has a bad day. Tomorrow is Carlos's birthday, and she's been planning his surprise party for months. She wouldn't just disappear. Something's wrong." Looking into their faces, seeing the genuine terror mixed with absolute love, I knew I was about to do something that would probably get me laughed out of the station when the other Rangers found out. I was going to treat this like more than just another college kid who'd probably lost track of time or had phone trouble. "I'll start searching immediately," I said. "Do you have her GPS coordinates? Any idea about her planned route?" Carlos handed me a printed email. Jessica had been methodical about her research plan, including waypoints, estimated travel times, and backup procedures. She'd even noted which areas to avoid due to unstable ground conditions. For a 22-year-old graduate student, she'd shown more preparation than most of the experienced hikers who came through here. As I studied her route, that academic part of my brain started making connections. 3 of her planned research sites were within a mile of locations where we'd had unexplained disappearances over the past 5 years. 2 were near areas where locals claimed to have seen unusual lights or strange weather patterns, and 1, the furthest site on her list, was about a quarter mile from the old Helmetta Mill ruins, where even the toughest rangers admitted they got bad feelings and tried to avoid after dark. "I'll radio back every 2 hours," I promised the family, "and I want you to call me immediately if you hear anything from her." Sophia Torres looked up at me with eyes that held way too much fear for a teenager. "Please bring my sister home, Mr. Morrison. Our family can't lose Jessica. She's everything to us." As I loaded my pack with search equipment, GPS unit, first aid supplies, and enough gear for an overnight search if necessary, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a typical missing hiker case. Call it intuition, call it pattern recognition, or call it 3 years of filing incident reports that never quite added up to logical explanations. Something about this felt different. My smartphone had full bars when I left the station, my GPS was working perfectly, and my digital camera was loaded with fresh batteries. All of that was about to change in ways that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the Pine Barrens, about folklore, and about the thin line between academic theory and terrifying reality. The Torres family stood in the parking lot watching me drive toward the Batstow area, and I could feel the weight of their love and desperation following me into the forest. I had no idea that their daughter's brilliant mind had led her into something that my own analytical nature was about to have to face head-on. The discovery. The first sign. Something was wrong came about an hour into my search, right around Jessica's second planned research site. I'd found her first location easily enough, a small clearing near a creek where she'd obviously spent time documenting plant samples. Her field notebook was still there, filled with neat handwriting and detailed sketches, but it was sitting open to a page that made my academic brain start sending up warning flares. The last entry was dated Saturday, 2:47 p.m., right around the time she should have been finishing up at that location. But instead of botanical observations, she'd written, "Movement in the tree line, no wind, animals completely silent, temperature drop of approx. 15 degrees in the past 10 minutes. Something isn't natural here." Under that, in handwriting that looked more hurried, "Heard singing, female voice but no one visible, melody unfamiliar but somehow familiar. Can't explain. Following sound to investigate." My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Maria Torres's number. "Any news? Please God, any news?" Her voice was raw with hours of crying. "Sophia keeps asking when Jessica's coming home, and I don't know what to tell her. She made Jessica's favorite breakfast this morning because she hoped." I found her field journal, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She was definitely here Saturday afternoon. I'm following her trail now." "Her journal?" Maria's voice brightened slightly. "She never goes anywhere without that thing. She's been keeping research journals since she was 12. Fills up 3 or 4 a year. Always said that documenting everything was the key to understanding patterns that other people miss." Smart girl, I thought. Too smart, maybe. "Mrs. Torres, did Jessica ever mention anything unusual about this area? Any local stories or folklore she might have researched?" There was a pause. "You know, she did say something strange when she was planning this trip. She'd been reading old newspaper archives looking for historical environmental changes in the region. She found some articles from the 1800s about a woman who lived alone in the deep forest, claimed to be some kind of healer. The locals called her a witch, said she could control the weather and talk to animals." My blood went cold. I'd read those same articles. They were part of the historical documentation I'd been compiling on regional folklore. The woman, known only as Mother Gray, had supposedly lived in the area around Batstow Village until she disappeared sometime in the 1890s. According to local accounts, she'd been collecting life essence from young people who ventured too deep into her territory. Academic curiosity, I'd called it when I filed those reports. Now it felt like something much more dangerous. Did Jessica seem particularly interested in that story? Oh yes, she said it was exactly the kind of historical context that could add depth to her environmental research. She wanted to visit the areas where this woman supposedly lived, see if there were any unusual plant growth patterns that might support the old stories about weather manipulation. Jesus Christ. Jessica Lynn Torres, brilliant graduate student, had gone looking for a witch. I kept following her trail, using both my GPS and the tracking skills I'd learned from the veteran rangers who liked to remind me that book learning wasn't everything. But Jessica's path was getting strange. Not just her route, but the evidence she was leaving behind. Her footprints were clear enough, but they were accompanied by disturbing signs that my academic mind kept trying to rationalize away. Dead birds along the trail, but not scattered randomly, arranged in patterns. Circles mostly, with some kind of symbol scratched into the dirt in the center. Trees with bark stripped off in spiral patterns that looked almost like writing. And flowers. Winter flowers that shouldn't be blooming in October, growing in perfect rings around areas where the normal forest vegetation was withered and dead. My phone buzzed with a text. Sophia Torres. "Please find my sister. She's supposed to help me with my college applications this weekend. She promised." Each message from that family felt like a weight settling on my chest. They weren't just worried. They were telling me stories about Jessica, sharing memories that painted a picture of someone who was clearly the heart of their family. The more I learned about her, the more desperate I became to find her alive. I reached Jessica's third research site around 3 p.m. This one was different. Her equipment was scattered around a small clearing like she'd dropped everything and run. Her GPS unit was smashed, her camera was missing, and her backpack was torn open with contents spilled across the ground. But weirdest of all, There were two sets of her footprints leading away from the clearing, one heading east toward her planned fourth site, the other heading west toward the old mill ruins. I knelt down to examine the tracks more carefully, using the magnifying glass from my field kit. The eastern tracks looked normal, the right depth, the right gait pattern for someone Jessica's size, but the western tracks were wrong. Too deep, like she was carrying extra weight, and the spacing was off, like she was walking with a different stride length. My academic brain wanted to analyze this logically. Maybe she'd doubled back for some reason. Maybe she'd been carrying extra equipment. But the part of me that had been reading folklore reports for 3 years was starting to whisper much more disturbing explanations. I decided to follow the eastern trail first. It led toward her planned research route, so it seemed more likely to be the real Jessica. But after 20 minutes of tracking, something impossible happened. I found her. She was sitting by a small pond about half a mile from the scattered equipment site, calmly writing in a field notebook. She looked up when she heard me approaching and smiled. "Oh, hello. Are you here about the research project too?" But something was wrong. This Jessica looked younger, maybe 16 or 17. Her hair was shorter, her clothes were different, and she was using a notebook I hadn't seen at the equipment site. "Jessica, your family's been worried sick about you." She looked confused. "Jessica, my name is Annie. I'm studying plant adaptation for my high school science fair project." She held up a notebook filled with childish handwriting and simple drawings. "Are you a forest ranger? My mom said I should talk to a ranger if I got lost." I stared at her, my rational mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This girl looked like Jessica Torres, but younger. She sounded like Jessica, but with a higher voice. She was wearing clothes that looked like they belonged in the 1990s. "What year is it?" I asked, feeling stupid. 1999, she said, like I was the one being weird. "Why?" My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call the Torres family, but there was no signal. The GPS was showing my location as the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And when I looked back at the girl, she was gone. Just gone. I spent the next hour searching the area around the pond, calling out, taking pictures with my digital camera, but finding nothing. No footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there except me. When I checked my camera, the photos showed only empty forest. By the time I made it back to Jessica's equipment site, it was getting dark and my phone was finally getting intermittent signal. I had 17 missed calls from the Torres family. I called Maria Torres back, dreading what I'd have to tell her. "Mr. Morrison, thank God. Did you find her?" I found some of her equipment. She definitely made it to her third research site, but how do you tell a desperate mother that you saw her daughter, but it was the wrong version of her daughter from the wrong time period? "But what? Please just tell me. Is she hurt? Is she..." "She's not at that location anymore. I'm going to keep searching, but I need to know, do you have any other photos of Jessica? Maybe from when she was younger?" "Of course. Why? Can you text me a picture of her from high school, maybe around age 16? There was a pause, then the sound of frantic whispering. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a photo. It was the girl I'd seen by the pond. "Exactly. Mr. Morrison?" Maria's voice was small now, scared. "Why did you want to see that picture?" I closed my eyes and tried to think of a way to explain this that wouldn't make me sound insane. "Mrs. Torres, I need you to trust me when I tell you that your daughter may be in more danger than we initially thought. I'm going to continue searching tonight, but if you don't hear from me by dawn, call the state police and tell them to send a full search team to the Batstow Village area." "What kind of danger?" I looked at the symbols scratched in the dirt, the unnaturally blooming flowers, the trees with their bark stripped in spiral patterns. I thought about the folklore I'd been documenting, the disappearances I'd been tracking, and the historical accounts of Mother Gray collecting life essence from young researchers. "The kind of danger that doesn't show up in any of our training manuals," I said. As I ended the call and prepared to follow the western trail toward the old mill ruins, my academic skepticism was waging war with 3 years' worth of documented evidence that something in these woods wasn't natural. Jessica Lynn Torres, brilliant graduate student had gone looking for historical context for her environmental research. Instead, she'd found something that had been waiting in these woods for over a century. Something that knew exactly how to use a young woman's intelligence and curiosity against her. And now it was my job to get her back, armed with nothing but a biology degree, a GPS unit that kept malfunctioning, and a growing certainty that all those folklore books I'd read in college were about to become required reading for survival. When hell broke loose. The western trail toward the old mill ruins should have taken me about 40 minutes to navigate in the dark. I had a good LED headlamp, decent night vision, and I'd hiked these trails dozens of times over the past 3 years. Should have been routine. Instead, it took me 3 hours to travel what couldn't have been more than a mile, and by the time I finally reached the ruins, I was starting to question my own sanity. The first thing that went wrong was my GPS. The unit that had been working perfectly all day started showing my location jumping around randomly. First the Atlantic Ocean, then somewhere in Canada, then coordinates that placed me in the middle of New York City. When I tried to use the compass feature on my phone, the needle spun in slow circles like it couldn't decide which way was north. But that wasn't the really disturbing part. The really disturbing part was that I kept finding Jessica. The second time was about 15 minutes into following the Western Trail. I came around a bend and there she was again, sitting on a fallen log and writing in her field journal. But this time she looked older, maybe in her 40s, with gray streaks in her hair and lines around her eyes. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching carefully. "Are you Jessica Torres?" She looked up and smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I was once, a long time ago. Are you here to help me finish my research? Your family's looking for you. They're worried sick." The older Jessica shook her head. "My family's gone now, has been for years. But the research is still important. Would you like to see what I've learned about the life cycles of the Pine Barrens ecosystem?" She held up her journal, and I could see it was filled with entries written in different handwriting styles, as if multiple people had been using it over many years. Some of the entries were dated from the 1800s. "What year do you think it is?" I asked, though I was starting to dread the answer. 2045, she said matter-of-factly. "I've been documenting the changes in plant adaptation patterns for, well, it feels like forever. Time moves differently here, you know. Sometimes I'm 22, sometimes I'm 60. Sometimes I remember having children. Sometimes I remember never getting married. But the research always continues." My hands were shaking as I pulled out my digital camera to document this encounter, but when I looked through the viewfinder, I saw only empty forest. When I looked up from the camera, the older Jessica was gone. I was starting to understand what was happening, and it terrified me. According to the folklore I'd been documenting, Mother Gray's power came from trapping people in temporal loops, experiencing every possible version of their lives simultaneously, while she slowly drained away their life essence. The victims would exist in all timelines at once, past, present, future, alternate realities, until there was nothing left but empty shells going through the motions of their research projects for eternity. My phone rang. Sophia Torres. "Mr. Morrison?" Her young voice was thick with tears. "Mom's crying and Dad's pacing around the house and nobody will tell me what's happening. Where's Jessica? Why can't you just bring her home?" "I'm going to bring her home," I heard myself promising, though I had no idea how. "Sophia, I need you to do something for me. I need you to think about Jessica. Really think about her. What makes her special? What makes her Jessica and nobody else?" "What kind of question is that? Please, it's important." Sophia was quiet for a moment, then, "She sings off-key when she's cooking. She always burns toast but makes perfect pancakes. She knows all the words to Disney movies but pretends she's too old for them. She reads 3 books at the same time and keeps all the bookmarks straight. She calls me Pickle because when I was little I ate so many pickles I turned green." Her voice broke. "She promised to teach me to drive next summer. She promised to help me with my college applications. She promises things and she always keeps her promises." That's when I understood what I was really fighting against. This thing, Mother Gray, or whatever she'd become after a century in these woods, wasn't just trapping Jessica in temporal loops. She was fracturing her into all the different versions of herself she could have been, spreading her consciousness so thin across multiple timelines that the real Jessica was getting lost in the noise. But Sophia's voice, listing all those specific individual details that made her sister unique, was like an anchor. Those weren't just memories. They were proof that there was one true Jessica Torres who belonged in 2011, who had a family that loved her desperately and completely. I kept following the trail toward the mill ruins, but now the forest itself seemed to be working against me. Paths I'd walked dozens of times were suddenly unfamiliar. Trees I'd used as landmarks were in the wrong places. At one point, I found myself walking in a perfect circle for 20 minutes, passing the same distinctive boulder over and over again, even though I was sure I was walking in a straight line. That's when the academic part of my brain finally shut up, and the part that had been reading folklore for 3 years took over. I stopped trying to navigate by GPS or familiar landmarks and started following something else entirely. Call it intuition, call it desperation, or call it the memory of Sophia Torres listing all the reasons her sister needed to come home. The mill ruins, when I finally reached them around midnight, were nothing like I remembered. The historical site I'd visited during my orientation 3 years ago had been a small collection of stone foundations and a partially collapsed mill wheel. This place was different, larger, more complete, and there were lights moving around inside the main structure. I approached carefully, using the night vision scope from my emergency kit. Through the scope, I could see someone moving around inside the ruins, but it wasn't Jessica. It was a woman in her 50s or 60s wearing clothing that looked like it belonged in the late 1800s. She was tending to what looked like a collection of glass containers arranged around the interior of the mill, each one glowing with pale, shifting light. And in the center of the space, sitting perfectly still in a wooden chair, was Jessica Torres. The real one, I thought. She looked exactly like the photos her parents had shown me. But her eyes were closed and she wasn't moving, not even to breathe that I could see. The older woman, Mother Gray, my brain supplied automatically, was moving from container to container, adjusting something, whispering words I couldn't hear. Each time she touched a container, the light inside would pulse brighter, and Jessica would flicker slightly like a bad TV signal. I understood what I was seeing. All those different versions of Jessica I'd encountered. The teenager, the middle-aged woman, probably dozens of others I hadn't found yet. They were fragments of her life force being stored in those containers. Mother Gray was harvesting every possible version of Jessica's existence, feeding off the energy of all her potential timelines simultaneously. My phone buzzed with a text from Carlos Torres. It's 12:30 a.m. and still no word. Maria hasn't stopped crying. Please tell me you're close to finding our daughter. She missed her Sunday night call for the first time in 4 years. Something's wrong. Please. Looking at that message, thinking about the family that loved Jessica so completely, they'd driven 3 hours because she missed one phone call. Something shifted in my chest. All my life, the other rangers had dismissed me as the academic, the bookworm, the guy who belonged behind a desk instead of in the field. But for the first time, I realized that all that useless reading I'd done had prepared me for exactly this moment. I knew what Mother Gray was. I knew how her power worked, and I knew her weakness. According to the historical accounts I documented, Mother Gray could fracture people across multiple timelines, but she couldn't create new realities. She could only manipulate existing possibilities. That meant the real Jessica, the one who belonged in 2011 with her family, was still the dominant timeline. All I had to do was anchor her to that reality strongly enough to overpower the fragments. I pulled out my phone and called Sophia Torres. Mr. Morrison, did you find her? Sophia, I need you to do something very important. I need you to put me on speakerphone with your whole family. Okay, but just do it. Trust me. A moment later, I could hear all 3 voices. Mr. Morrison, what's happening? Do you know where Jessica is? I found her, I said, staring at the mill ruins where the real Jessica sat motionless while some century-old witch fed off her life force. But I need your help to bring her home. I need you to talk to her. What do you mean, talk to her? I mean, I need you to tell her who she is. Not who she could be or might have been. Who she is, right now, in 2011. I need you to remind her of all the reasons she needs to come home. There was confused murmuring, then Maria Torres's voice. Jessica, baby, if you can hear this, it's Mom. You need to wake up, sweetheart. You need to come back to us. As her mother's voice carried across the clearing toward the mill ruins, I saw something impossible happen. Jessica's fingers twitched. Keep talking, I whispered into the phone. Carlos Torres. Mija, it's Papa. Sophia made your favorite cookies yesterday because she was worried about you. They're waiting for you at home. Another twitch, this one stronger. Sophia. Jessica, it's Pickle. I need you to come home because I don't know how to fill out these college application essays and you promised to help me. You always keep your promises. And that's when Jessica Torres opened her eyes. Mother Gray must have sensed the change because she spun around, and I got my first clear look at her face. She was ancient, impossibly old, with eyes like black holes and skin that seemed to shift and change as I watched. When she saw me crouched at the edge of the clearing with my phone, she opened her mouth and screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of every nightmare you've ever had. Every moment of pure terror distilled into audio form. The sound hit me like a physical force and knocked me backward into a tree. But I didn't drop the phone. Keep talking to her, I shouted to the Torres family. Don't stop. And as three voices poured out of my phone speaker, a mother, a father, and a younger sister telling Jessica Torres all the reasons she needed to come home, I watched Mother Gray's century-old power start to crack. The glass containers around the mill began to shatter, one by one, releasing streams of light that swirled around the clearing like confused spirits. Each time a container broke, Jessica looked more solid, more real, more present. But Mother Gray wasn't giving up without a fight. She raised her hands, and the forest exploded into chaos. Trees started moving, their roots tearing up through the ground like massive tentacles. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in seconds, and snow started falling in October. Every piece of technology I had, phone, GPS, camera, even my LED headlamp, began flickering and dying. And then the other Jessicas started appearing. All around the clearing I could see them. Dozens of different versions of Jessica Torres from different timelines, different possibilities. The teenage Jessica from the pond. The middle-aged Jessica from the trail. A Jessica who looked like she was in her 70s. A Jessica who looked like she was still a child. All of them staring at me with empty eyes. All of them moving toward the mill ruins like they were being pulled by invisible strings. But the Torres family kept talking. Maria. Remember when you were 8 and you stayed up all night taking care of me when I had the flu? You made me soup and read me stories and told me you were going to be a doctor so you could take care of everyone. Carlos. Remember your first day of college when you called me crying because you missed home? But you didn't quit. You stayed because you said education was too important to give up on. Sophia. Remember last Christmas when you taught me how to make tamales and we got flour all over the kitchen and Mom was so mad? But you took the blame because you said big sisters are supposed to protect little sisters? With each memory, each specific detail that proved who Jessica really was, more of the fractured versions began to flicker and disappear. They weren't real. They were just possibilities, shadows of what could have been. The real Jessica was the one who had loving parents and a younger sister who called her by a silly nickname, the one who made perfect pancakes and sang off key while cooking. Mother Gray screamed again, and this time the sound was pure rage. She pointed at me with one twisted finger and I felt something like ice water flow through my veins. Suddenly I was seeing my own fractured timelines, a version of me that had never become a ranger, a version that had quit after the first week, a version that had died in a hiking accident 5 years ago. My consciousness started to scatter across multiple possibilities and I understood how Jessica had felt as her sense of self was torn apart. But then I heard Sophia Torres's voice through the phone speaker. Jessica, please. I need my big sister. I need you to come home and help me figure out how to be as brave and smart and kind as you are. And I remembered why I was here. Not because I was the toughest ranger or the most experienced tracker, Because I was the one who read the folklore reports, the one who documented the patterns, the one who understood that love was stronger than any century-old curse. I focused on that love, not my own, but the love that family had for Jessica Torres, and used it to anchor myself back to my own timeline. The academic who had become a ranger because he wanted to protect people, who had spent 3 years documenting supernatural incidents because he believed there were things in these woods that needed to be understood and confronted. "Listen to them, Jessica," I shouted across the clearing. "Listen to your family." The real Jessica, still sitting in that wooden chair but now fully conscious and aware, turned her head toward my voice. For the first time since I'd found her, she spoke. "Jake Morrison?" Her voice was weak but clear. "The ranger who reads all those old books?" "Yeah," I said, and despite everything that was happening around us, the moving trees, the supernatural snow, the screaming century-old witch, I almost smiled. "The nerd ranger." "Good," Jessica said, and there was strength in her voice now. "Because I read some of those same books while I was researching this area, and I know how to break this bitch's power." Mother Gray spun toward Jessica, raising her hands to cast some new horror at us, but Jessica was already moving. She stood up from the chair, the first time she'd moved under her own power since I'd found her, and began speaking in a clear, strong voice. "My name is Jessica Lynn Torres. I am 22 years old. I am a graduate student at Rutgers University studying environmental science. My mother's name is Maria, and she makes the best arroz con pollo in New Jersey. My father's name is Carlos, and he teaches high school math and coaches soccer. My little sister's name is Sophia, but I call her Pickle because she's been my sweet little pickle since the day she was born. I live in the year 2011. I have a research project due next month, and I'm going home to my family." Each word she spoke made her more solid, more real, while the fractured versions of herself continued to fade away. Mother Gray was still screaming, still trying to maintain her power, but Jessica's sense of self, reinforced by her family's love and her own brilliant analytical mind, was stronger than a century of supernatural manipulation. "And you," Jessica said, turning to face Mother Gray directly, "are just a sad, lonely old woman who's been dead for over 100 years and doesn't know how to let go." That's when Mother Gray made her final play. She gestured toward me, and suddenly I was flying through the air, slamming into the side of the mill ruins hard enough to crack ribs. As I slumped to the ground, gasping for breath, she advanced on Jessica with her hands glowing, with the same pale light that had been in all those containers. But Jessica Torres was a graduate student in environmental science who had spent months researching this area, including all the folklore about Mother Gray. She knew something that the old witch had forgotten after a century of easy victories. "You can only take what people give you," Jessica said, backing away but not running. All those other victims, they were alone, scared, confused. They didn't know what was happening to them, but I'm not alone. She held up her phone, somehow still working despite all the electromagnetic chaos around us. "And I'm not scared of some dead bitch who preys on researchers." The Torres family was still talking, still pouring their love through that phone speaker, still anchoring Jessica to her real life and real identity. But now Jessica was talking back. "I'm coming home, Mom. I'm sorry I missed our Sunday call, but I'm coming home. Papa, I'm okay. Tell Sophia her big sister is on her way. Pickle, get those college applications ready. We have work to do." And that's when Mother Gray's power finally completely shattered. The remaining glass containers exploded simultaneously, releasing streams of light that swirled around the clearing for a moment before disappearing into the night sky. The life force of dozens of victims finally free after decades or centuries of imprisonment. The mill ruins, which had looked solid and complete while under Mother Gray's influence, suddenly crumbled back into the historical foundations they'd always been, and Mother Gray herself began to fade, her ancient form becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. But just before she vanished entirely, she looked directly at me and spoke in a voice like autumn leaves. "This isn't over, Bookworm. There are others like me in these woods. Older things. Hungrier things." Then she was gone, leaving Jessica and me alone in a clearing that was suddenly, blessedly normal again. Jessica walked over to where I was slumped against the ruined foundation, favoring her left leg but moving under her own power. "You okay, Mr. Morrison?" "Jake," I said, accepting her help to stand up. "And I think I have some cracked ribs, but I'll live." I looked at her carefully in the moonlight. "What about you? How much do you remember?" "Everything," she said grimly. "All of it. Every timeline, every possibility she showed me. But I also remember who I really am. And that's what matters." She smiled, and it was the same warm smile from the photograph her parents had shown me. "Thank you for bringing my family's voices to me. I don't think I could have fought her off without hearing them." I pulled out my phone to call the Torres family and let them know Jessica was safe, but there was still no signal this deep in the woods. "Come on," I said. "Let's get you home. Your family's been worried sick." As we started walking back toward the ranger station, Jessica was quiet for a few minutes. Then she said, "Jake? What she told you before she disappeared, about there being others like her in these woods, do you think it's true?" I thought about all the incident reports I'd filed over the past 3 years, all the patterns I'd been documenting, all the folklore I'd been treating as academic curiosity instead of survival information. "Yeah," I said. "I think it's true." "Good," Jessica said, "because I'm thinking about changing my research focus. Environmental science is fine, but I think these woods need someone who specializes in a different kind of ecosystem management." I looked at her, this brilliant young woman who had just survived something that would have shattered most people's sanity, who was already thinking about how to use her experience to protect other potential victims. "You know what?" I said. "I think the Pine Barrens could use a researcher who understands both the natural and supernatural ecosystems." Jessica Torres smiled. "Then I guess we'll be working together, Professor." As we made our way back through the forest, my academic mind was already spinning with possibilities. All those folklore reports I'd been filing, all those patterns I'd been documenting, they weren't just curiosities anymore. They were data, research material, evidence of threats that needed to be understood and confronted, and I wasn't going to be doing it alone anymore. Coming home. We reached the ranger station just as the sun was coming up, both of us exhausted, dirty, and probably traumatized in ways we wouldn't fully understand for years. But Jessica Torres was alive, conscious, and walking under her own power, which, 8 hours earlier, had seemed like an impossibility. The Torres family was waiting in the parking lot. They'd never left. I watched from a distance as Jessica ran toward her parents and sister, and I witnessed something more powerful than anything I'd seen in those supernatural mill ruins. The moment a family's love was vindicated, the moment their faith that their daughter would come home was rewarded. Maria Torres grabbed Jessica first, holding her so tightly I was worried she might crack her ribs worse than mine were already cracked. Carlos wrapped both of them in his arms, and Sofia completed the circle, all of them crying and talking at once. "Mija, we were so scared." "Mom, I'm okay. Don't you ever scare us like that again." "Jessica, I saved you some cookies." "I know, Pickle, I know." Standing there watching them, I understood something that 3 years of ranger training hadn't taught me. This was what I was really protecting when I went into those woods. Not just individual hikers or researchers or campers, but the families who loved them, the people who waited at home, the connections that made life worth living. After the initial reunion, Jessica walked over to me while her family loaded into their car. "Jake, there's something I need to tell you before we leave." "What's that?" She looked back toward the deep woods we'd just emerged from, then back at me. When I was fragmented, scattered across all those different timelines, I saw things. Other victims who weren't as lucky as me. People who are still trapped in there, still being harvested by things that make Mother Gray look like a beginner. My stomach dropped. How many? I don't know exactly. Dozens, maybe. Hikers, researchers, hunters. People who just got too curious about the wrong parts of these woods. She pulled out her phone and showed me a list of notes she'd apparently typed while we were walking back. I wrote down everything I could remember. Names, approximate locations, descriptions of the entities holding them. I looked at the list, and my academic brain immediately started recognizing patterns. Some of the names matched missing person reports I'd filed over the past 3 years. Others were people who'd been declared dead after searches turned up nothing. "This is a job for the state police," I said, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Or the FBI, or someone with a lot more authority than a couple of rangers. Jessica gave me a look that was equal parts amused and determined. "Jake, you just helped me escape from a century-old witch using folklore research and my family's love conveyed through a cell phone. You really think the FBI has a supernatural crimes division?" She had a point. "Besides," she continued, "who else is going to believe this? Who else has been documenting these patterns for years? Who else knows enough about the local folklore to have a chance against whatever else is out there?" I looked at the list again, thinking about all those incident reports I'd filed, all those missing person cases that had never made sense, all those families who'd never gotten closure. "You're talking about making this into a career," I said. "I'm talking about making this into a mission." Jessica glanced back at her family, who were waiting patiently by their car. "That thing showed me what happens to people who get taken, not just killed, but erased, scattered across possibilities until they forget who they really are. No one should have to go through that. No family should have to wonder forever what happened to someone they love." Sofia Torres called out from the car. "Jessica, Mom says we need to get you to a hospital to make sure you're okay." Jessica waved at her sister, then turned back to me. "I'm going home now. I'm going to eat my mother's arroz con pollo and help Sofia with her college applications and probably sleep for about 14 hours, but after that..." She handed me a card with her contact information. "After that, I want to come back and help you figure out how to protect people from the things that live in these woods." I took the card, though I wasn't sure whether to be encouraged or terrified by the prospect of having a research partner who'd just survived supernatural abduction. "Jessica," I called as she started walking toward her family's car. She turned back. "For what it's worth, your research proposal was really well written. Very thorough preparation. Excellent documentation of your methodology." She laughed, the first genuinely happy sound I'd heard from her since finding her in those mill ruins. "Thanks, Professor. I'll remember that when I'm writing up my report on indigenous supernatural entities and their impact on Pine Barrens ecosystem management." As the Torres family drove away, I waved goodbye to Sofia, who had rolled down her window to shout, "Thank you for bringing my sister home." The gratitude in that young voice was worth more than any commendation I might get from the Forestry Service. I spent the next 3 hours at the ranger station, writing the most carefully worded incident report of my career. I documented Jessica's disappearance, the search process, and her successful recovery, while carefully avoiding any details that would make my supervisor think I needed psychological evaluation. Official version: Jessica Torres had gotten lost while conducting field research, spent a night in the woods, became disoriented, and was found safe the next morning. The truth was going in my personal files, along with all the other supernatural incident documentation I'd been compiling for 3 years. But as I was finishing the paperwork, my supervisor, Chief Ranger Patricia Wells, knocked on my door. "Morrison, heard you had a successful search and rescue last night." "Yes, ma'am. Missing graduate student. Found her safe this morning." Wells sat down across from my desk and studied me carefully. She was a 30-year veteran of the Forestry Service, tough as nails, and not someone who missed details. "Jake, I've been reviewing your incident reports from the past 3 years. You document a lot of unusual cases." My heart rate spiked. "Ma'am?" "Missing hikers who disappear from areas with no logical exit routes. Equipment failures that don't match any known technical problems. Animal behavior patterns that don't correspond to any documented wildlife psychology." She leaned forward. "You've been tracking something, haven't you?" I considered my options. I could deny everything, play dumb, stick to the official explanations, or I could trust that my supervisor, who'd been working these woods since before I was born, might have noticed some of the same patterns I'd been documenting. "Yes, ma'am. I think there are threats in these woods that don't appear in any of our training manuals." Wells was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a file folder that was easily 3 inches thick. This is 30 years of incident reports that I've been filing under administrative miscellaneous because there was no other category that made sense. She slid the folder across the desk to me. Patterson, my predecessor, left me a similar file when he retired. He told me to find someone on my team who was smart enough to recognize patterns and brave enough to investigate them. I opened the folder and saw 30 years worth of documentation that made my 3-year collection look like amateur hour. Missing persons, equipment failures, animal behavior anomalies, weather patterns that defied meteorological explanation, and incident reports from rangers who'd encountered unusual circumstances while conducting search and rescue operations. Ma'an, are you telling me that the Forestry Service has been aware of supernatural activity in the Pine Barrens for decades? I'm telling you that the Forestry Service employs people who are smart enough to know when something doesn't fit the normal explanations, and dedicated enough to keep documenting it even when there's no official support for that kind of research. Wells stood up. Morrison, as of today, you're being reassigned to a new position, Special Incident Documentation and Response. You'll still handle regular ranger duties, but your primary responsibility will be investigating cases like the one you handled last night. I stared at the file folder, then at my supervisor. Ma'am, this is a real assignment? With official support? Unofficial official support, Wells said. As far as the bureaucrats in Trenton are concerned, you're conducting statistical analysis of anomalous incident patterns to improve safety protocols. As far as I'm concerned, you're making sure that families like the Tereses don't have to wait 30 years to find out what happened to their missing loved ones. She headed for the door, then paused. Morrison? That graduate student you found. Jessica Torres. Her academic advisor called this morning. Apparently, she's requested permission to change her research focus to something called Ecosystem Threat Assessment, with emphasis on non-standard environmental factors. You know anything about that? I thought about Jessica's determination to help rescue the other victims she'd seen while trapped in Mother Gray's temporal fragments, about her plan to make protecting people from supernatural threats into her career mission. I think she's found a research topic that really interests her, ma'am. Wells smiled. Good. Because something tells me you're going to need a research partner who understands both the academic and practical sides of this job. After she left, I sat alone in my office looking at 30 years worth of documentation that proved I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone, and the weird incidents I'd been investigating were part of a much larger pattern of supernatural activity in the Pine Barrens. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Torres. Just wanted to let you know I made it home safe, had the best arroz con pollo of my life, and helped Sophia start her college essay about overcoming fear. We'll call you next week to discuss research collaboration. Thank you again for bringing me back to my family. Jessica, not professor yet, but working on it. I looked out the window at the Pine Barrens, thinking about all the families who were still waiting for someone to come home. All the victims who were still trapped by things that made Mother Gray look like a beginner. All the threats lurking in these woods that most people couldn't even imagine. For the first time since I'd become a ranger, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not despite being the bookworm who read folklore reports, but because of it. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm a forest ranger who learned that sometimes the most important part of protecting people isn't knowing how to track or fight or survive in the wilderness. Sometimes it's knowing how to read the old stories, recognize the patterns, and understand that love, the kind of desperate, faithful, unshakable love that makes a family drive 3 hours because their daughter missed one phone call, is stronger than any supernatural force that's ever existed. The Pine Barrens are full of dangers that don't appear in any training manual. But now they've got 2 researchers who specialize in exactly that kind of threat, and we're just getting started. My name is Tommy Caldwell, and I'm going to tell you about the day I learned that some things in this world can't be faced down with grit and a good rifle. I've been a forest ranger for 23 years, worked every kind of terrain from the Rockies to the Cascades, and I ain't never backed down from anything in these woods. Bears, mountain lions, armed poachers, serial killers. Hell, I've stared them all down without blinking. But this thing I'm about to tell you about, this changed everything I thought I knew about courage. It was October 2011, and I was stationed at Olympic National Forest in Washington. Been there about 8 years by then, knew every trail, every creek, every damn tree like they were old friends. The recession had hit the Park Service hard. We were understaffed, overworked, and dealing with budget cuts that made everything harder. But that's just how it was back then. You did your job, you didn't complain, and you sure as hell didn't call in sick unless you were dying. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Got my coffee at 5 a.m., checked the weather reports. Clear skies, perfect October day in the Pacific Northwest. Leaves were turning, air was crisp, and tourists were still coming through for the fall colors before winter set in. I was planning to do routine trail maintenance on the Hoh River Trail. Maybe check on some of the research permits we'd issued to the university kids. Then my phone rang. Ranger Caldwell? The voice was shaky, female, barely holding it together. This is Linda Brooks. My daughter is missing. I grabbed my notepad, went into professional mode. Ma'am, when did you last see your daughter? 3 days ago. She was supposed to call Sunday night, but... The woman's voice cracked. She never misses her calls home. Never. Megan calls me every Sunday at 7 p.m. sharp, has done it since she started college 4 years ago. That's when I heard it. The sound that always gets to me, no matter how many years I've been doing this job. Pure, desperate love in a parent's voice. This wasn't just worry. This was a mother whose whole world was missing. Tell me about Megan, Mrs. Brooks. She's 22, a graduate student at University of Washington, environmental science. She's doing her thesis on old-growth forest preservation. Linda Brooks took a shaky breath. She got a permit to collect soil samples in your forest. Said she'd found some research about ancient Native American sites that might help protect the trees from logging companies. I was writing all this down, but something in her voice made me stop. Ma'am, you said she never misses calls? 22 years old, and she still calls her mama every Sunday night to tell me about her week. Now the tears came. She tells me about her classes, her research, the boys she's dating. Last Sunday she was so excited about this project. Said she'd found evidence of something important, something that could change everything. Right then, another voice came on the line. Deeper, male, just as broken. Ranger, this is David Brooks, Megan's father. You have to understand, our daughter is our everything. She's brilliant, she's kind, she volunteers at animal shelters in her spare time. When she was 8, she saved up her allowance for 3 months to buy food for stray cats. And her little brother Michael, Linda added, he worships the ground she walks on. He's only 15, and he keeps asking when his big sister's coming home. I don't know what to tell him. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just another missing hiker case. This was about a family's heart walking around outside their bodies, and now it was lost somewhere in my forest. We'll find her, I told them, and I meant it. Give me her last known location. She was staying at that little motel in Forks, David said. Said she was heading to some area called the Ancient Grove Research Site. It's marked on her maps. I knew the spot, deep in the old growth section where trees older than Christ himself stretched up into the canopy. Not many people went there. It was off the main trails, and you needed special permits. Perfect place for a graduate student to do research and perfect place to get lost. I'm heading out there now, I told them. Keep your phones on. After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a minute, thinking. 23 years in these woods, and families like the Brooks still got to me. The way Linda's voice broke when she talked about Sunday phone calls. The way David described his daughter like she hung the moon. The kid brother waiting for his hero to come home. That's what drives guys like me. Not the adventure, not the adrenaline. It's knowing that somewhere out there, people who love each other more than life itself are counting on you to bring their world back together. I loaded up my gear, GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency flares, my .30-06 rifle, and enough supplies for 3 days if needed. The truck's radio was crackling with routine check-ins from other rangers, but I wasn't paying much attention. My mind was already in those deep woods, tracking a missing girl whose family's love was burning through the phone lines. The drive to the ancient grove area took about 40 minutes on Forest Service roads that got progressively worse the deeper you went. By the time I reached the trailhead, I was on dirt tracks that barely qualified as roads. Megan's little Honda Civic was parked there, covered in 3 days' worth of morning dew and fallen leaves. I walked around the car looking for clues. Driver's door unlocked, keys still in the ignition. Purse on the passenger seat with wallet, ID, and about $60 in cash still inside. Her cell phone was there too, one of those early smartphones that barely worked out here anyway. Whatever happened to Megan Brooks, it wasn't a robbery. The back seat had her research gear, soil sample containers, pH meters, some kind of ground-penetrating radar unit that looked expensive. Graduate student budget, but professional equipment. This girl was serious about her work. I found her notebook on the dashboard, left open to her last entry. The handwriting was excited, almost frantic. October 16, 2011. Found it. The site matches the tribal descriptions exactly. Ancient burial ground, pre-contact era. Soil composition is unlike anything I've seen. The trees here are responding to something in the earth itself. This could be the proof we need to stop the logging. The guardian spirits the elders talked about. I think they might have been protecting something real. Guardian spirits, great. Just what I needed. Another city kid getting spooked by local folklore and wandering off into the wilderness. But still, something about that entry bothered me. The way she wrote "found it" like she'd discovered buried treasure. And what did she mean about the trees responding to something? I shouldered my pack and headed into the woods, following the trail markers Megan had left. Smart girl. She'd tied bright pink surveyor's tape to trees every 50 yards or so, making it easy to track her route. The path led deeper into the old growth section, where the trees were so big and old they blocked out most of the sky. About a quarter-mile in, I found her first research site. A small clearing where she'd dug several soil samples, left the holes neat and covered like she'd been taught. Her equipment was still there. Sample containers labeled and sealed, her ground radar unit set up and apparently abandoned mid-scan. That's when I noticed something weird. The trees around this clearing were wrong. Not diseased exactly, but different. Their bark was darker, almost black in places. The leaves were the wrong color for October, not the beautiful golds and reds you'd expect, but a sickly brown like they were dying from the inside out. And it was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, no insects. Just the sound of wind through branches that sounded more like whispers than anything natural. I checked my GPS unit to mark the location, but the screen was fritzing out, showing impossible coordinates that put me somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Electronics always got weird in the deep forest, but this was different. The thing wasn't just malfunctioning. It was showing readings that made no sense. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual, but when I tried to use the compass app, it started spinning like a record player. Even my mechanical backup compass was acting up, needle spinning between magnetic north and some point deeper in the forest. But I'd been navigating these woods since before GPS existed. I could find my way by landmarks, by the lay of the land, by instincts honed over decades of wilderness work. I didn't need fancy electronics to track one missing graduate student. I followed Megan's trail deeper into the ancient grove, past trees so old they'd been saplings when Columbus was still in diapers. The pink tape markers continued, leading me through terrain that got stranger with every step. The path wasn't straight. It curved and twisted through the forest in patterns that didn't make sense, like Megan had been following something other than logic or efficiency. After about 2 hours of hiking, I found her backpack. It was hanging from a branch about 8 feet off the ground, nowhere near any cliff or drop where she might have fallen. Just hanging there like someone had put it there deliberately. Inside was her laptop, more research notes, and a digital camera with photos that made my blood run cold. The first dozen pictures were normal, scientific shots of soil samples, tree bark, root systems. But then they got weird. Photos of the same trees from different angles, except the trees looked different in each shot. Not like she'd moved around them, but like the trees themselves had moved. The last photo on the camera was a close-up of what looked like carved symbols on a tree trunk. Ancient symbols, weathered by age but still visible. Below the symbols was a message carved in fresh bark. recent enough that sap was still bleeding from the cuts. She belongs to the Guardian now. That's when my phone started ringing. I looked at the display. Linda Brooks calling. Out here in the deep woods with no cell towers for miles, there was no way I should be getting a signal. But the phone was ringing clear as day. "Hello?" I answered, expecting static. "Ranger Caldwell?" Linda's voice came through like she was standing right next to me. "Any news about Megan? Please tell me you found something." "I'm following her trail now, Mrs. Brooks. Found her backpack and some of her research gear." "Oh God, is she hurt? Is she..." Linda's voice broke. "You have to understand, she's our whole world. 22 years ago, I almost died giving birth to her. The doctors said it was a miracle we both survived. She's been my miracle baby ever since." David's voice joined the call. "Ranger, my daughter saved my life 3 years ago. I had a heart attack and she performed CPR until the paramedics arrived. The doctor said her quick thinking was the only reason I'm still here. She's not just our daughter, she's our hero." "And Michael," Linda sobbed. "He made her a card for when she comes home. Drew a picture of them hiking together with the words, 'My sister is my best friend,' in crayon. He's been carrying it around for 3 days waiting to give it to her." I was standing there in those impossible woods, holding a phone that shouldn't work, listening to parents pour their hearts out about a daughter who might already be dead. But something about their love, their absolute faith that I'd bring her home, gave me strength I didn't know I had. "I'm gonna find her," I promised them. "Whatever it takes." "Thank you," Linda whispered. "She's supposed to be maid of honor at her cousin's wedding next month. She already has her dress picked out. She's so excited about it." The line went dead. I stared at my phone. No signal bars, no service indicator, nothing. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't normal telecommunications. But I'd heard that family's love clear as day, and it was still echoing in my chest like a war drum. Following Megan's pink markers deeper into the ancient grove, I started noticing more weird shit. Trees with bark that looked almost like skin. Shadows that moved wrong, fallen in directions that didn't match the sun's position. And the silence was getting heavier, like the forest itself was holding its breath. About 3 miles from where I'd found her backpack, the trail marker stopped. Not like she'd run out of tape, but like she just stopped marking her path. The last piece of pink tape was tied to an absolutely massive cedar tree, easily 8 feet in diameter and probably over 1,000 years old. Beyond it, no more markers. But there was something carved into the base of that ancient cedar. Not the random scratches you sometimes see from bear claws or casual vandalism. These were deliberate symbols, carved deep into the living wood. The same symbols I'd seen in Megan's photographs, but older, much older. And below the ancient symbols, fresh carving that made my skin crawl. "The trespasser will be cleansed. The forest remembers all wounds." That's when I heard it. Singing. Female voice, young, coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. Singing something that sounded like a lullaby, but in a language I didn't recognize. Could have been Native American. Could have been something older. The melody was beautiful and heartbreaking, like someone singing themselves to sleep for the last time. I followed the sound, pushing through undergrowth that seemed to resist my passage. Branches caught at my clothes, roots tried to trip me, and more than once I swear the path behind me just wasn't there anymore when I looked back. The singing led me to a clearing I'd never seen before in 23 years of working these woods. A perfect circle of dead earth surrounded by trees so ancient they looked more like living mountains than plants. In the center of the clearing was a ring of standing stones, not arranged by nature, but placed there deliberately by human hands centuries ago. And inside the stone circle, I found Megan Brooks. She was alive, but just barely. Sitting in the center of the circle, singing that haunting lullaby while staring at something I couldn't see. Her clothes were torn, her hands and feet were bleeding, and her eyes, Jesus, her eyes were completely black, not like dilated pupils, but black from edge to edge like she was looking at the world through holes in her soul. "Megan?" I called out. "Megan, can you hear me?" She stopped singing and turned toward me, but those black eyes didn't focus on my face. They looked through me, past me, at something standing behind me in the forest. "He's been waiting," she said in a voice that wasn't quite her own anymore. "The Guardian has been waiting so long for someone to hear his pain." I spun around, rifle ready, but there was nothing behind me except trees and shadows. When I turned back, Megan was standing now, moving toward the edge of the stone circle with jerky, unnatural movements like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. "The trees remember," she continued in that hollow voice. "Every axe, every saw, every wound cut into the living wood. The Guardian remembers the screaming of his children as they fell." That's when the forest started moving, not swaying in the wind. There was no wind. Moving. The trees around the clearing began to shift and change position, sliding through the earth like ships on water. The path I'd used to get here sealed itself as trees closed ranks behind me, cutting off my escape route. And then I saw him. The Guardian wasn't human, hadn't been human for a very long time. He stood maybe 9 feet tall, covered in bark-like skin that shifted between tree flesh and something more ancient. Moss grew from his shoulders like fur, and his eyes were the deep green of old-growth forest that had never seen an axe. But there was something wrong with him, something corrupted. Black veins ran through his bark skin like infection, and where they spread, the moss died and flaked away. His green eyes were shot through with threads of poisonous yellow, and when he spoke, his voice was the sound of trees screaming as they fell. "You bring death to my domain," the Guardian said, pointing one twisted branch finger at me. "Your kind brings saws and axes and fire. Your kind murders my children and calls it progress." I kept my rifle trained on him, but something told me bullets wouldn't do much good against whatever this thing was. "I didn't come here to hurt anything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I came to find the girl and bring her home." "She belongs to me now," the Guardian hissed. "She will sing the death songs of my fallen children until the end of time. She will remember their names when no one else does." Megan was still moving toward the edge of the circle, and I could see what would happen if she stepped outside those standing stones. She'd become like him, something twisted between human and forest spirit, trapped forever in this corrupted grove. "Her family loves her," I said desperately. "She has people who need her, parents who die without her, a little brother who thinks she hung the moon." The Guardian's yellow-green eyes flickered with something that might have been pain. "Love," he spat. "Your kind speaks of love while you murder my children. Where was love when the loggers came? Where was love when the chainsaws sang?" And that's when everything went to hell. The Guardian raised his arms, and every animal in the forest answered his call. Bears with eyes like burning coals came crashing through the underbrush, mountain lions with too many teeth and claws like switchblades, wolves that moved in perfect synchronization like they were sharing one twisted mind. But it wasn't just the predators. Deer with antlers sharp as spears, birds with beaks like razors, even squirrels with claws that could strip flesh from bone. Every creature in the Olympic forest was converging on our location, all of them moving with the same unnatural, puppet-like jerks as Megan. I started shooting, not to kill, but to scatter them, to buy time. But for every animal I dropped, 2 more took its place. And the ones I hit didn't stay down. They got back up with wounds that should have killed them, black blood streaming from their injuries, and kept coming. The worst part was their eyes. Every single animal had the same black, empty eyes as Megan. They weren't attacking out of animal instinct or territorial defense. They were being used, controlled, turned into weapons against their will. "You cannot fight the forest itself," the Guardian laughed as I reloaded my rifle with shaking hands. "This is my domain. Here, I am God." That's when the trees started moving faster, rearranging themselves around me like a living maze. Every time I thought I'd found an escape route, branches would grow together to block my path. The ancient grove was reshaping itself, making sure I'd never leave. My GPS unit was now showing coordinates that put me in Antarctica. My compass was spinning so fast it looked like a fan. Even the sun seemed wrong, casting shadows that fell uphill and changed direction when I wasn't looking directly at them. I was trapped in a nightmare where the laws of physics didn't apply. surrounded by possessed animals and controlled by something that had been nursing a grudge against humanity for centuries. And in the middle of it all was Megan Brooks, taking another step toward the edge of that stone circle where her soul would be lost forever. But then my phone rang again. Same impossible signal, same clear connection to the outside world. This time it was David Brooks. "Ranger Caldwell, please tell me you found her. Please tell me our baby girl is okay." I was crouched behind one of the standing stones, reloading my rifle while a possessed black bear tried to claw its way to me, and somehow I was having a normal phone conversation with a desperate father. "I found her, Mr. Brooks. She's alive, but she's in trouble, bad trouble. What can we do? Tell us what to do. We'll pay any ransom, go anywhere, do anything. She's our daughter." And that's when it hit me. Love. The Guardian had spit the word like it was poison, but he'd also flinched when I mentioned Megan's family. This thing had been corrupted by pain and loss. Maybe pure love was the one thing it couldn't understand, couldn't corrupt, couldn't control. "Tell me about Megan," I said, dodging a mountain lion that moved like it was underwater. "Tell me why you love her." "She saved my life," David said immediately. "Heart attack 3 years ago. She never panicked, never hesitated, just started CPR and kept going until the paramedics arrived. The doctor said her quick thinking was the only reason I survived." "And Linda?" "Megan calls her mother every Sunday night, has done it since she started college. Not because she has to, but because she wants to. She tells Linda about her classes, her research, the boys she's dating. Even asks for cooking advice because she wants to learn to make her grandmother's recipes." The Guardian was advancing on me, his bark skin crackling with each step, but I kept talking. "What about her brother Michael?" 15 years old, and he worships the ground she walks on. When he was little, he used to tell people that Megan was his best friend in the whole world. She taught him to ride a bike, helped him with homework, took him hiking every summer. When she left for graduate school, he cried for 2 days. I could hear the love in David's voice, pure and powerful as sunlight cutting through storm clouds. And something amazing happened. The Guardian stopped advancing. "Love," I said to the corrupted forest spirit. "That's what you've forgotten. That's what turned you into this thing. You loved these trees, loved this forest, but when humans started cutting them down, your love became hate. Your protection became possession." The Guardian's yellow-green eyes were shifting, the poisonous threads fading for brief moments to reveal deeper green underneath. "They murdered my children," he said, but his voice was quieter now, less like screaming trees and more like wind through leaves. "And Megan was trying to save them," I replied, standing up slowly. The possessed animals had stopped attacking, standing motionless like someone had hit their pause button. "She wasn't here to hurt your forest, she was here to protect it." I pulled out Megan's notebook, read from her research notes. The guardian spirits the elders talked about. I think they might have been protecting something real. This could be the proof we need to stop the logging. The guardian's bark skin was changing, the black infection lines fading. For the first time, he looked at Megan not as a possession, but as a person. She was trying to help, I continued. Just like her family is trying to help her now. That's what love does. It protects, it heals, it saves. It doesn't possess or control. Megan blinked, and for a second her eyes were brown again instead of black. "Daddy," she whispered. "Daddy, I can hear you." David's voice came through my phone clear as day. "Megan? Baby girl, is that you?" "I'm scared, Daddy. There's something in the forest, something angry and hurt. It's been in pain for so long." The guardian knelt beside her, and I could see he was fighting some internal battle. The corruption wanted to keep her, to use her voice to sing the death songs of fallen trees. But somewhere underneath the centuries of pain and anger, the original spirit remembered what it had been created to do: protect, not possess. "The forest remembers," Megan said, her voice getting stronger. "But it doesn't have to remember only the pain." She looked at the guardian with eyes that were fully her own again. "You were made to be a protector, weren't you? To guard something precious and beautiful. But you can't protect something by destroying it." The guardian's bark skin was healing now, the black veins retreating. The animals around us were shaking their heads like they were waking from a long dream, their eyes returning to normal. I have been lost, the guardian admitted. Lost in anger for so long I forgot the joy of new growth, the peace of morning sunlight through leaves. Then remember, Megan said gently. Remember why you loved this place enough to guard it. The forest around us began to change. Not the nightmare rearrangement from before, but a slow return to natural order. Trees moved back to their original positions, paths reopened, and the oppressive silence filled with the normal sounds of wilderness life. The guardian stood, and I could see he was healing. The bark skin was smooth again, moss growing green and healthy from his shoulders. His eyes were deep forest green, no trace of poisonous yellow. The girl will remember, he said to me. She will tell others about this place, help them understand that some things should not be touched by saws and axes. I will, Megan promised. I'll make sure they understand. The guardian nodded, then began to fade like morning mist. But before he disappeared completely, he spoke once more. Tell her family. Tell them their love reached even here, even into the darkness of an old spirit's pain. That kind of love, that is the most powerful magic of all. And then he was gone. I helped Megan to her feet, checking her for injuries, cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. Her eyes were clear, her voice was her own, and she was looking around the clearing with the wonder of someone who'd just witnessed something impossible and beautiful. Can you walk? I asked. I think so. How long was I? 3 days. Your family's been going out of their minds with worry. She started crying then, not from fear or trauma, but from relief and love. My family. God, they must be so scared. I need to call them. I need to let them know I'm okay. My phone had full signal now, clear as if we were standing in downtown Seattle. I handed it to her and watched as she called her parents. Mom? Mom, it's me. I'm okay. I'm safe. The ranger found me. I could hear Linda Brooks screaming with joy on the other end of the line, calling for David and Michael to come to the phone. And for the next 10 minutes, I listened to a family pour their love through telephone lines, each of them needing to hear Megan's voice, needing to tell her how much they'd missed her, how scared they'd been, how happy they were that she was coming home. It took us 4 hours to hike back to her car. The forest was peaceful now, alive with normal sounds and normal shadows. My GPS worked perfectly, showing accurate coordinates. My compass pointed true north. The only evidence of what we'd experienced was Megan's notebook, which now contained additional pages in handwriting that wasn't quite human. Detailed information about the forest's history, the location of sacred sites, and specific legal arguments that could be used to protect the area from logging. When we reached the trailhead, there were 3 cars waiting: her parents' minivan, her brother's friend's car, and a rental sedan that turned out to belong to her cousin who'd driven up from Portland. The whole family had converged on Olympic National Forest to wait for news. I'll never forget the moment Linda Brooks saw her daughter walking out of those woods. The woman let out a sound I'd never heard before. Pure joy mixed with relief, mixed with love, so powerful it seemed to shake the trees. She ran toward Megan like her life depended on it, and when they collided in the middle of that parking lot, both of them crying and laughing and holding each other, I had to turn away because it was too beautiful and too private for an old ranger to witness. David was next, wrapping both his wife and daughter in his arms and just holding them, not saying anything because there weren't words for what he was feeling. Then Michael, the 15-year-old little brother who'd been trying to act tough for 3 days, broke down completely and buried his face in his sister's shoulder. I thought you were gone, he sobbed. I thought I'd never see you again. I'm here, Megan whispered, holding him tight. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. That was 6 months ago. Megan finished her thesis using the information the Guardian had given her, and her research has already been instrumental in establishing new protected status for 3 different old-growth areas in Washington state. She still calls her mother every Sunday night, still helps her little brother with homework, still treats her family like they're the most precious things in the world. Because they are. I learned something in those ancient woods. Something that 23 years of ranger work hadn't taught me. There are things in this world that can't be faced down with grit and determination, can't be solved with rifles and first aid kits. But those same impossible things can be healed by something even more powerful. The kind of love that drives parents to stay by the phone for 72 hours straight, waiting for news about their missing child. The kind of love that makes a little brother carry a homemade card in his pocket for 3 days. The kind of love that reaches through supernatural darkness and reminds even corrupted spirits what they were created to protect. I still work these woods, still answer calls about missing hikers and campers, but now I know that sometimes the most important equipment I carry isn't my GPS or my rifle. It's the ability to hear the love in a family's voice and carry it with me into whatever darkness I might face. Because love like that, that's the most powerful magic of all. My name is Sam Wheeler, and I'm going to tell you about the day I learned that evil ain't always human, and that sometimes being green as grass can save your damn life when experience would have gotten you killed. I was 26 years old in October of 2009, and I'd been working as a forest ranger in the Pine Barrens for exactly 18 months. Yeah, 18 months, not even 2 years. Most of the veteran rangers still looked at me like I was some college kid playing dress-up in a uniform, and hell, maybe I was. I'd gotten into this job right after graduating with my forestry degree, thinking I'd spend my days helping lost hikers and cataloging wildlife. Real Boy Scout shit, you know? The older guys like Martinez and Thompson would shake their heads when I'd volunteer for the tough cases, muttering stuff like, "Kid's gonna get himself killed trying to prove something." But I had something to prove. Growing up in Trenton, I'd always felt like I had to work twice as hard to get half the respect. My dad was a mechanic, my mom cleaned houses, good people, but nobody ever expected much from the Wheeler kid. So when I got this ranger position, I was determined to show everyone I belonged out there in those woods. The Pine Barrens had always fascinated me, 1,000,000 acres of wilderness right in the heart of one of the most populated areas in the country, filled with ghost towns, abandoned settlements, and more legends than you could shake a stick at. The Jersey Devil was just the beginning. Locals would tell you stories about witches, cursed Indian burial grounds, and things that hunted in the deeper parts of the forest, where even experienced rangers rarely went. I thought most of it was bullshit, small-town folklore designed to keep tourists away from the really dangerous stuff like old mine shafts and unstable terrain. Shows how much I knew. It was Tuesday, October 13th, 2009. Yeah, I remember the date exactly, for reasons you'll understand soon enough, when I got the call that changed everything. I was at the ranger station updating our database on my ancient Dell computer when the phone rang. Our secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, usually handled calls, but she was at lunch, so I picked up. "Pine Barrens Ranger Station, this is Sam." The voice that answered was shaking so bad I could barely understand it. "Please, God, please tell me you can help us. Our daughter, our Hannah, she's missing." Something in that woman's voice hit me right in the chest. Pure terror mixed with love so deep it made my throat tight. "Ma'am, slow down. Tell me your name and what happened." I'm Carol Williams, my husband David and I. Our daughter Hannah is missing. She's been gone for 3 days now. 3 days. In October. Nighttime temperatures had been dropping into the 30s. "Mrs. Williams, have you contacted the police?" Yes, of course we have." Her voice cracked. "But they keep saying she's probably just... that college girls sometimes just take off for a few days. They don't understand. You don't understand. Hannah would never just disappear. She calls me every single day at 6 p.m. sharp, every day for the past 4 years since she started college. She's never missed a call, not once, and she was supposed to be home Sunday night for her brother's birthday party." The way she said brothers, plural, caught my attention. "How old are her brothers, ma'am?" "The twins just turned 12. Hannah, she's their hero. She promised she'd be there to help them blow out their candles. She's never broken a promise to those boys, not ever." Carol Williams was crying now. "Please, you have to understand, Hannah isn't just our daughter. She's the light of our family. She's studying environmental science at Rutgers because she wants to protect places like the Pine Barrens. She volunteers at animal shelters. She tutors kids in math for free. She's everything good in this world. I was scribbling notes, but honestly, I was getting emotional just listening to this woman talk about her daughter. Mrs. Williams, where was Hannah when she went missing? She was doing some kind of research project for her senior thesis. Something about the ecological impact of old settlements in the Barrens. She was camping alone near Ong's Hat. I told her not to go alone, but she said she'd be fine, that she'd done it before. The mother's voice turned desperate. We drove out there yesterday, and her car is still in the parking area. Her tent was still set up, but she wasn't there. Some of her things were missing. Her backpack, her camera, her notebook, but her sleeping bag was still in the tent, and her cooler full of food was untouched. Ong's Hat. Even as a rookie, I knew that name made the old-timers nervous. It was one of those places where the forest got weird. Compasses spun, cell phones died, and hikers reported feeling watched even in broad daylight. The official reports blamed magnetic anomalies from old mining operations. But I'd heard Martinez mutter more than once that some places in the Barrens were just wrong. Mrs. Williams, I want you and your husband to come to the station. Bring a recent photo of Hannah and any information about exactly where she was planning to camp. I'm going to start a search. Oh, thank God. Thank you so much. She was sobbing with relief. The police officer said we should wait a few more days, that she'd probably turn up. But I know my baby, something's wrong, something's terribly wrong. After I hung up, I sat there for a minute, trying to process what I'd just committed to. I'd never run a search operation by myself. Hell, I'd only assisted on 3 missing person cases since I started, and they'd all been day hikers who'd gotten turned around and found their way out before we even got started. This was different. This was a multi-day search in one of the most dangerous parts of the Barrens, and I was flying solo because Martinez was on vacation and Thompson was dealing with a family emergency. I should have called for backup from the state police. I should have waited for one of the veteran rangers to get back, but something about Carol Williams's voice, the way she'd described her daughter's love for her little brothers, the way she'd said Hannah was everything good in this world, it got under my skin in a way I'd never experienced before. 20 minutes later, David and Carol Williams walked into the ranger station, and I understood immediately why their daughter meant so much to them. They weren't just worried parents. They were 2 people whose entire world revolved around their children, and half of that world had vanished. David Williams was a big guy, probably worked construction, with hands that shook as he placed a photo on my desk. "This is our Hannah," he said, and his voice was thick with barely controlled emotion. "Taken last month at her campus. She's 21, about 5'6", brown hair, brown eyes. She's got a small scar on her left eyebrow from when she was 8 and tried to climb a tree to rescue a kitten." I looked at the photo and felt something twist in my chest. Hannah Williams was beautiful, sure, but it was more than that. She had this smile that looked genuinely happy, like she was laughing at some joke the photographer had just told. Her eyes were bright with intelligence and kindness. This wasn't just some college kid. This was somebody's whole world. Carol leaned forward, clutching her husband's arm. "She calls every day at 6. Every single day. Yesterday at 6:15 when the phone didn't ring, I knew. A mother knows, Mr. Wheeler. Something happened to our baby." "Tell me about the twins," I said, making notes. "You mentioned she promised to be at their birthday party." David's face crumpled a little. "Jake and Josh, they worship their big sister. Every weekend she comes home. She takes them on nature walks, teaches them about birds and plants. They've been asking for her non-stop since Sunday. We had to tell them Hannah was helping the forest because we didn't want to scare them." "She's supposed to walk me down the aisle," Carol whispered, and I looked up from my notes confused. "David and we never had a proper wedding. We were so young when the twins came along, money was tight. But next year, for our 20th anniversary, we're finally going to do it right. And Hannah, she insisted she wanted to walk me down the aisle because she said I'm the strongest woman she knows." Carol was crying again. She picked out her dress already. Yellow because she said it would make me think of sunshine on my happiest day. Christ. I had to clear my throat before I could speak. Mrs. Williams, I promise you I'm going to find Hannah. I'm going to bring your daughter home. The look of gratitude and hope that crossed both their faces nearly broke me. I'd never made a promise like that before. Never felt the weight of someone else's love and desperation pressing down on me. But sitting there, looking at these two people who loved their daughter more than life itself, I knew I'd crawl through hell before I'd let them down. They gave me all the details they could. Hannah's campsite was about 2 miles north of the main Ong's Hat Trail, near an old stone foundation that used to be a settler's cabin. She'd been researching the ecological recovery patterns around abandoned settlements. Her car was a red 2004 Honda Civic, license plate number scratched into my notebook. She had a digital camera, a GPS unit, camping gear, and enough food for 4 days. One more thing, David said as they were getting ready to leave. Hannah's got this little wooden cross necklace. Belonged to her grandmother. She never takes it off, never. When you find her, that's how you'll know for sure it's our Hannah. As I watched them drive away, Carol Williams turned back to look at the station, and I could see her lips moving. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew she was praying. For her daughter, for me, for a miracle. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for the search. I loaded my truck with camping gear, first aid supplies, extra batteries for my GPS and radio, and enough food and water for 3 days. My supervisor protocol said I should wait for backup, but the weather report showed a cold front moving in, with temperatures dropping into the 20s by Thursday night. If Hannah Williams was hurt and stranded somewhere in the Barrens, time was running out. As I drove toward Ong's Hat that evening, I kept thinking about what Carol had said. A mother knows. I'd never had kids, hell, I'd never even had a serious girlfriend, but something about the way she'd described Hannah made me feel connected to this girl I'd never met. Maybe it was because Hannah was trying to protect the same forests I'd devoted my life to. Maybe it was because she sounded like the kind of person who made the world a little brighter just by being in it. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in my 18 months as a ranger, I felt like I had a real chance to prove I belonged in these woods. I found Hannah's Honda right where her parents said it would be, parked in a small clearing about a quarter-mile off the main road. The car looked normal enough. Doors locked, no signs of struggle, everything neat and tidy. I used my flashlight to check the interior through the windows, and everything seemed in order. Her purse was locked in the glove compartment, which meant she'd taken her wallet and ID with her. The trail to her campsite was easy enough to follow in daylight, but by the time I reached the old stone foundation, the sun was setting, and the forest was taking on that eerie quality the Pine Barrens were famous for. The trees seemed to lean in closer, and every sound, every owl hoot, every rustle of leaves, seemed amplified in the growing darkness. Hannah's campsite was exactly as her parents had described. Her small dome tent was still standing, guy lines tight, rain fly properly secured. But when I unzipped the door and shined my flashlight inside, my heart sank. Her sleeping bag was there, along with some clothes and toiletries, but it was obvious she hadn't slept in the tent Sunday night. The sleeping bag was still rolled up neat as a pin, and there was no indentation in the floor where someone had laid down. Outside the tent, I found the first signs that something was seriously wrong. Her camp stove was cold, with a pot of water still sitting on it like she'd been about to make dinner, but got interrupted. Her cooler was untouched, packed with enough food for several more days. But her backpack was gone, along with her camera, notebook, and GPS unit. I spent 2 hours examining the campsite with my flashlight, looking for any clue about what had happened to Hannah Williams. The ground around the tent was soft enough to take footprints, and I found plenty of them. Small boot prints that had to be hers, leading in various directions around the camp. But here's what made my skin crawl. All of her footprints led away from the campsite. Not a single one led back. It was like she'd walked into the forest Sunday evening and simply vanished. I made camp about 50 yards from Hannah's tent, close enough to keep an eye on her site, but far enough away to avoid contaminating any evidence I might have missed. As I sat by my small campfire, eating a can of beans and trying to plan my search strategy for the morning, I called the Williams family to give them an update. Carol answered on the first ring. "Sam, did you find her? Please tell me you found her." "I'm at her campsite now, Mrs. Williams. I can tell you that Hannah's tent and most of her gear is here and undisturbed. It looks like she left the camp Sunday evening, probably to do some research or take photos and, well, she hasn't come back yet. But she's okay? She's going to be okay? I closed my eyes, wishing I could give her the answer she needed to hear. I'm going to start a full search at first light. I'll follow every trail she might have taken, check every possible place she could have gone. I promise you, Mrs. Williams, I won't stop looking until I bring Hannah home. The boys keep asking about her, Carol whispered. They made her birthday cards yesterday. Jake drew a picture of Hannah teaching him to identify bird tracks, and Josh wrote her a poem about how she's the best big sister in the world. They're so proud of those cards, and they keep asking when she's coming home so they can give them to her. My throat got tight again. Tell Jake and Josh that Hannah's lucky to have brothers who love her so much, and tell them I'm going to make sure she gets those cards. After I hung up, I sat by my fire for a long time, staring into the flames and trying to make sense of the situation. An experienced camper doesn't just wander off and disappear. Hannah was studying environmental science, which meant she knew how to read terrain and navigate safely. She'd been camping in these woods before, according to her mother, so she wasn't some greenhorn who'd panic and get lost. But people did vanish in the Pine Barrens. It happened more often than the Ranger Service liked to admit. Sometimes they turned up days later, confused and dehydrated, with stories about getting turned around on trails they'd hiked dozens of times before. Sometimes they were found weeks later, dead from exposure or accidents in places that search teams had already covered multiple times. And sometimes they were never found at all. As I banked my fire and settled into my sleeping bag, I tried to stay optimistic. I was young, I was motivated, and I had something the previous searchers probably didn't have. I was carrying the love and desperation of Hannah's family with me like a sacred trust. That had to count for something. I was wrong about a lot of things that night, but I was right about one. It counted for something, just not in any way I could have imagined. The morning of October 14th dawned gray and cold, with a mist hanging low over the forest floor. I was up before sunrise, eager to start the search while the morning light was still clean and clear. I made coffee and studied my topographic maps, marking out a grid pattern that would let me cover the most ground efficiently. According to her parents, Hannah had been researching ecological recovery around old settlements, which meant she'd been looking for more stone foundations, old cellar holes, maybe the remains of wells or root cellars. The Pine Barrens were littered with the remnants of communities that had thrived in the 18th and 19th centuries, places with names like Martha's Furnace, Batstow, and Harrisville. Most were ghost towns now, reclaimed by the forest. I started by following the most obvious trail away from Hannah's campsite, an old logging road that led deeper into the forest. The morning was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Usually the Pine Barrens were alive with bird calls, the chatter of squirrels, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But as I walked deeper into the woods, that ambient forest noise faded to an eerie silence. About half a mile from the campsite, I found the first piece of evidence, a small piece of yellow fabric caught on a thorn bush at eye level. I recognized it immediately from the photo Hannah's parents had shown me. It was from the bright yellow fleece jacket she'd been wearing when they'd dropped her off for her camping trip. My pulse quickened as I carefully removed the fabric and bagged it as evidence. The placement was perfect, exactly at the height where it would snag if someone was walking along the trail. Hannah had definitely come this way. I followed the old logging road for another quarter mile, checking every bush, every tree, every patch of soft ground for signs of passage. And I found them. More boot prints in the muddy sections of the trail, all heading in the same direction, deeper into the forest. But then something weird happened. The trail forked, splitting into two paths that led in completely different directions. Hannah's boot prints were on both trails. I stood at that fork for 10 minutes, trying to figure out what I was seeing. The prints on the left fork looked fresh, probably made within the last day or two. But the prints on the right fork looked fresh too. Same boot size, same tread pattern, same stride length. It was like Hannah had somehow walked down both trails at the same time. I decided to follow the left fork first, marking my location on my GPS and leaving a small cairn of stones to help me find my way back. The left trail curved north, climbing gradually up a low ridge covered with scrub pine and oak. The going was easy, and I made good time for about 20 minutes. Then I found Hannah's camera. It was sitting on a fallen log, right in the middle of the trail, like someone had carefully placed it there for me to find. The camera was a nice one, a digital SLR that probably cost more than I made in a month. It was unharmed, clean, not a scratch on it. The battery was still good, and when I turned it on, there were 43 photos stored on the memory card. I scrolled through them quickly, hoping to find clues about where Hannah had gone or what had happened to her. Most were exactly what you'd expect from an environmental science student. Shots of plant communities, close-ups of interesting insects, wide angles of forest recovering around old stone foundations. But the last 5 photos made my blood run cold. Photo 39. A normal shot of the forest floor, showing some kind of moss formation around the base of an old oak tree. Photo 40. The same shot, but now there was a shadow visible in the background. A human-shaped shadow that didn't match any of the trees or rocks in the frame. Photo 41. A blurry image, like the camera had been shaking when the shutter clicked. But in the blur, you could make out what looked like a figure standing between 2 trees about 30 feet away. Photo 42. A crystal-clear photo of a woman, probably in her 60s, with wild gray hair and wearing what looked like a tattered black dress. She was smiling directly at the camera, and her smile was the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen. Not evil exactly, but hungry, like she was looking at something delicious. Photo 43. Complete darkness, just black. I stared at that sequence of photos for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Hannah had clearly encountered someone in the forest, an older woman who seemed to be following her. The progression from shadow to figure to close-up suggested that this woman had been getting closer and closer to Hannah as she took the pictures. But who the hell was this woman? And what was she doing wandering around the deepest parts of the Pine Barrens? I scrolled back through the earlier photos, looking for any other signs of the strange woman, but the first 38 shots were all normal nature photography. Whatever had happened, it had happened fast. Hannah had gone from taking routine research photos to documenting what looked like a stalking incident in the space of just a few minutes. I turned the camera off and clipped it to my belt. This was evidence, and I needed to get it back to the station for proper analysis. But first, I had to keep looking for Hannah. The camera was a good sign. It meant she'd been on this trail recently, and she'd been alive and alert enough to document whatever was happening to her. I kept following the left fork, moving more quickly now that I knew I was on the right track. The trail climbed higher, winding through stands of pitch pine and scrub oak that grew thicker and more twisted the farther I went. The silence was still bothering me. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. About a mile past where I'd found the camera, the trail opened into a small clearing dominated by the ruins of what had once been a substantial stone house. This wasn't just a cabin foundation like the one near Hannah's campsite. This was the remains of a 2-story building, complete with a stone chimney that still stood nearly 20 feet tall. Ivy and vines had grown over most of the walls, but you could still see the outlines of windows and doorways. And there, sitting on what had once been the front steps, was Hannah's GPS unit. Like the camera, it had been placed deliberately, positioned so that anyone entering the clearing would see it immediately. I picked it up and turned it on, hoping the battery life was better than my own aging GPS. The unit powered up without problems, and I immediately checked the stored waypoints to see where Hannah had been. She'd marked a lot of locations over the past few days: her campsite, several old foundations, a few scenic viewpoints. But the last waypoint she'd saved was labeled Help and had been created the previous evening at 6:47 p.m. The coordinates put it about half a mile northeast of where I was standing. That was less than 2 hours before sunset on Sunday. Hannah had been in trouble, and she'd tried to mark her location for rescuers to find. I looked around the clearing more carefully, and for the first time I started noticing details that made my skin crawl. The vegetation around the stone ruins was wrong. It was too green, too healthy, like it was growing in soil that was unnaturally rich. Most disturbing were the trees at the edge of the clearing. They were all dead, leafless and gray, their branches twisted into shapes that almost looked like grasping fingers. But it was the smell that really got to me. Underneath the normal forest scents of pine and decaying leaves, there was something else. Something sweet and rotten, like fruit that had been left to spoil in the sun. It was faint, but once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. I programmed Hannah's help coordinates into my own GPS and started walking northeast, leaving the clearing behind as quickly as possible. The forest on this side of the ruins was different, darker, more tangled, with thick underbrush that made walking difficult. But I pushed through, following the straight-line course my GPS indicated, determined to reach the spot where Hannah had sent her electronic cry for help. It took me 20 minutes to cover that half-mile, fighting through thorns and fallen trees that seemed designed to keep people out. But when I finally reached the coordinates Hannah had marked, I found something that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was another clearing, smaller than the one with the stone ruins, and in the center of it was what looked like a circle of standing stones. Not big ones, each stone was maybe 3 feet tall, but they were clearly arranged in a deliberate pattern. And inside the circle, the ground was completely bare. Not just cleared, bare, like nothing would grow there. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I could see Hannah's boot prints leading right up to the edge of the stone circle. And inside the circle, the prints changed. They became the prints of a child. I stood at the edge of that stone circle for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. Hannah's boot prints, size 7, distinctive waffle tread, led directly to the circle. But inside the ring of stones, the footprints were tiny, maybe a size 2 or 3, like they belonged to a little girl. It was impossible. People don't shrink. Feet don't change size. But I was looking at the evidence with my own eyes, and there was no other explanation that made sense. I called out, hoping against hope that Hannah might be somewhere nearby and able to hear me. Hannah, Hannah Williams, if you can hear me, call out. My voice echoed strangely in the clearing, like the sound was being absorbed by the trees instead of bouncing back normally. No answer. Just that same unnatural silence that had been following me all morning. I took photos of everything. The stone circle, the footprints, the dead ground inside the ring. Then I called the ranger station on my radio, hoping Martinez had come back from vacation early, or that Thompson had finished dealing with his family crisis. Static. Pure static, even though I was well within range of the station's radio tower. I tried my cell phone next, thinking I could call the state police and get some backup out here. No signal, even though I'd had 2 bars when I'd started my hike that morning. For the first time since I'd started this search, I felt a cold knot of fear forming in my stomach. I was alone in the deepest part of the Pine Barrens, following a trail that made no logical sense, and now my communication equipment was failing just when I needed it most. I looked around the clearing again and noticed something I'd missed the first time. Carved into one of the standing stones, almost invisible unless you were looking at it from exactly the right angle, was a symbol. It looked like a tree, but inverted, with the roots pointing upward and the branches growing down into the earth. And scratched into the bark of the nearest oak tree, at about eye level, were 3 letters. H.W. Hannah Williams had been here recently, and she'd been trying to leave a message for whoever came looking for her. I spent another hour in that clearing, searching for any other clues Hannah might have left behind. I found her water bottle, empty, hanging from a branch about 10 feet from the stone circle. I found another piece of yellow fabric, this one much larger, tied around a tree trunk like a marker. And I found something that made my hands shake. Her grandmother's wooden cross necklace lying on the ground just outside the circle of stones. The cross was broken, snapped in half like someone had yanked it violently from her neck. I picked up the pieces carefully and put them in my pocket. When I found Hannah, not if, when, I'd give them back to her. Maybe her family could have the necklace repaired. It was clearly precious to her, and to them. But as I prepared to leave the clearing and continue my search, something happened that changed everything. I heard Hannah's voice calling my name. Sam, Sam, help me. I'm here. The voice was coming from deeper in the forest, maybe 100 yards northeast of the stone circle. It sounded exactly like the voice I'd heard on her parents' answering machine. Young, feminine, with just a hint of a Jersey accent. I ran toward the sound, crashing through the underbrush, following my compass northeast. Hannah, keep calling, I'm coming. Sam, hurry, please hurry. I ran for 5 minutes following the sound of her voice before I burst into another clearing. This one was larger, with a small pond in the center surrounded by cattails and dead trees. And there, standing on the far side of the pond, was Hannah Williams. Except it wasn't Hannah Williams. The person standing across the pond had Hannah's face, Hannah's brown hair, Hannah's small frame. She was wearing the same clothes Hannah had been wearing when she disappeared: jeans, hiking boots, and what was left of that yellow fleece jacket. But something about her was wrong. Her movements were too fluid, too graceful, like she was floating instead of walking. And her eyes were completely black. "Sam," she said, and her voice was Hannah's voice, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once instead of from her mouth. "I've been waiting for you." I stopped running and slowly reached for the pepper spray on my belt. Every instinct I had was screaming that this wasn't Hannah Williams, that this was something pretending to be her. But it looked so much like her, sounded so much like her, that part of my brain was insisting I was wrong.
"Hannah?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are your parents worried sick? We need to get you back to the ranger station." The thing that looked like Hannah smiled, and I saw that her teeth were too sharp. "Oh, Sam. Sweet, naive Sam. You have no idea what you've stumbled into, do you?" The voice was changing now, becoming deeper, older. The face was changing too, aging rapidly, the smooth young features becoming lined and weathered. The brown hair was turning gray, then white.
In the space of 30 seconds, Hannah Williams transformed into the old woman from the camera photos, the woman with wild gray hair and the hungry smile. "You've been very helpful," the old woman said, and now her voice sounded like autumn leaves rustling in a cold wind. Leading me right to all of her things, the camera, the GPS, that precious little cross. She fought so hard to keep that cross, you know. Kept saying it would protect her from me. I backed away from the pond, my hand finding the grip of my pepper spray. "What did you do to Hannah Williams?" The old woman laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "What did I do to her? Oh, my dear boy, I made her young again. Eternally young. She's 7 years old now, playing in my garden, picking flowers and chasing butterflies. Isn't that wonderful? She'll never have to worry about growing up, about college stress, about disappointing her family. She'll be innocent and happy forever." "That's impossible." "Is it?" The woman gestured toward the stone circle, which I could see through the trees behind me. "This forest is older than your civilization, boy. Older than your science. There are powers here that your kind gave up believing in centuries ago. Powers that remember when the world was younger." I was still backing away, but the forest seemed to be closing in around me. The trees were moving, their branches reaching down like arms trying to grab me. "I've been collecting children for a very long time," the old woman continued, and now she was walking across the pond, her feet somehow finding purchase on the surface of the water. "Beautiful children, innocent children, children with so much love in their hearts that their families would do anything to get them back. That love calls to me like a beacon." She was halfway across the pond now, moving steadily toward me. I could see that her feet weren't touching the water at all. She was walking on air, about 6 inches above the surface. Hannah was perfect. So much love surrounding her. So much devotion from her family. That kind of love has power, Sam. It tastes like honey and starlight. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard the old woman's laughter echoing through the forest. But I didn't look back. I crashed through the underbrush, following my compass back toward the stone circle, then toward the ruins of the house, then toward the logging road that would take me back to Hannah's campsite. But something was wrong with the forest. The trails weren't where they should be. I'd been walking for 20 minutes following my compass west toward Hannah's campsite, but I kept ending up back at the same stone circle where I'd found the child-sized footprints. I was trapped in some kind of loop, walking in what felt like a straight line but somehow always returning to the same place. And each time I arrived back at the stone circle, something was different. The first time, it was exactly as I'd left it. The second time, there were fresh flowers scattered inside the ring. wildflowers that didn't grow in October. The third time, I heard the sound of a child laughing, high and sweet and terrifying. By the fourth time, I found myself back at the stone circle. I was ready to panic. The sun was starting to set, and I was no closer to escaping this supernatural maze than I'd been an hour before. Worse, my GPS had stopped working entirely, showing only static on its screen, and my compass was spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. That's when I heard voices. Multiple voices all calling my name. Sam, Sam, where are you? I recognized all of them. My supervisor, Martinez, my colleague Thompson, my friend Jake from the state police, even my parents who lived 3 hours away and had no idea I was out here. But the voices were wrong. They all had the same hollow, echoing quality as the fake Hannah's voice. They were coming from all directions at once, filling the forest with a cacophony of false concern. Sam, we're here to help you. Sam, we've been looking everywhere for you. Sam, your family is so worried. I covered my ears and tried to think. This was some kind of supernatural trap, designed to lure me deeper into the forest or drive me insane with confusion. The old woman, the witch, because that's clearly what she was using illusions to keep me here. But why? What did she want with me? Then I remembered what she'd said about Hannah's family, about how much they loved her and how that love had power. Carol and David Williams loved their daughter more than life itself. They would do anything, sacrifice anything to get her back, including sending a naive young ranger into a supernatural trap. I was bait. I was supposed to disappear too, adding another layer of tragedy to the Williams family's suffering. Another source of guilt and desperation for the witch to feed on. But understanding the trap and escaping it were two different things. I was still stuck in this loop, still finding myself back at the stone circle no matter which direction I walked. And now the fake voices were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush. I needed to think like a ranger, not like a victim. What did I know about the supernatural folklore of the Pine Barrens? What had the old-timers told me about places where the rules of reality didn't apply? Iron. I remembered Martinez mentioning that iron could disrupt supernatural influences. Something about iron being too real for things that existed between worlds. I didn't have any iron tools with me, but I did have something better. I pulled out my pocket knife. Good old-fashioned steel with enough iron content to hopefully make a difference. Then I knelt at the edge of the stone circle and started carving a line in the dirt, creating a break in the perfect circle of stones. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The moment the steel blade broke the integrity of the circle, I felt a surge of something. Power, maybe, or just reality reasserting itself. The fake voices stopped abruptly and my compass needle swung back to north. I looked up from my carving and saw the forest clearly for the first time in hours. The trails were back where they should be, the trees looked normal, and I could see the evening sky through the canopy above. I had broken the spell, or at least weakened it enough to escape. But I wasn't leaving without Hannah Williams. I'd made a promise to her family, and I intended to keep it. Supernatural witch or no supernatural witch. Now that my compass was working again, I oriented myself and started walking northwest, toward the area where I'd seen the illusion of Hannah transform into the old woman. If the witch had been telling the truth, and God help me, I believe she had been, then the real Hannah was somewhere nearby, transformed into a child and trapped in whatever twisted version of reality the witch had created. I walked for 10 minutes, my knife still in my hand, before I found it. A cottage that definitely hadn't been there before. It was small and neat, with a thatched roof and windows that glowed with warm yellow light. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and I could hear the sound of children playing in a garden behind the house. This was where the witch lived, where she kept her collection of eternally young children. I approached the cottage carefully, staying in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. Through the front window I could see the interior, a cozy living room with a fireplace, comfortable chairs, and shelves lined with old books. It looked like something out of a fairy tale, but fairy tales, I was learning, were a lot more terrifying than I'd ever realized as a kid. I crept around to the back of the cottage, following the sound of children's laughter. The garden was larger than it had any right to be, stretching back into the forest in all directions, filled with flowers that bloomed in impossible colors and trees that bore fruit I didn't recognize. And there, playing among the flowers, were at least a dozen children. They ranged in age from maybe 5 to 10 years old, all dressed in old-fashioned clothing that looked like it belonged to different historical periods. Some wore colonial-era dresses and breeches, others wore clothing from the Victorian era, and a few were dressed in more modern styles from various decades. But they all had the same thing in common. Their eyes were completely blank, showing no recognition, no personality, no awareness of anything beyond their simple games. And there, kneeling beside a flower bed and carefully picking daisies, was a little girl with brown hair and brown eyes, wearing miniature versions of Hannah Williams' camping clothes. I'd found her. The witch hadn't been lying. She really had transformed Hannah into a child. But this wasn't the magical, innocent transformation the witch had described. This was something horrible, a theft of everything that made Hannah who she was. Her memories, her personality, her very soul had been stripped away, leaving only an empty shell that looked like her 7-year-old self. I had to get her out of there. I had to get all of them out of there. But first, I had to deal with the witch. I circled back around to the front of the cottage and knocked on the door. After a moment it opened, revealing the old woman. She was wearing a simple brown dress now, and her gray hair was neatly braided. She looked like somebody's grandmother except for the eyes. Those were still completely black, like looking into deep water at midnight. "Sam Wheeler," she said, smiling that hungry smile. "I wondered when you'd find your way here. Please come in. I've been expecting you." I kept my knife ready, but I stepped through the doorway. The inside of the cottage was even more fairy tale perfect than it had looked from outside, warm and cozy, with a smell of bread baking and herbs drying. It should have been comforting. Instead, it was the most terrifying place I'd ever been. "You've seen my garden?" the witch said, settling into a rocking chair by the fireplace. "What do you think of my collection?" "I think you're a sick old woman who steals children," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed. "Steal? Oh, my dear boy, you misunderstand completely. I don't steal them. I save them. Do you know what happens to children when they grow up? They become adults. They become cynical and cruel and tired. They lose their wonder, their innocence, their capacity for joy. I preserve all of that. I keep them safe from the corruption of adulthood. By turning them into zombies. By keeping them pure." Her voice was getting sharper, more defensive. "That little Hannah girl you're so concerned about, do you know what her future held? College stress, career pressure, heartbreak, disappointment. She would have grown old and bitter, just like everyone else. Now she'll be happy forever." I thought about Carol Williams talking about Hannah's plans to walk her down the aisle, about David Williams carrying his daughter's first-grade drawing in his wallet, about twin brothers who hero-worshipped their big sister and made her birthday cards. She wasn't going to grow old and bitter, I said. She was going to have a life, a real life, with people who loved her. Love. The witch spat the word like it tasted bad. Love is what brought her to me, boy. All that overwhelming, suffocating love from her family. It called to me from miles away. Love like that is a burden, a weight that would have crushed her eventually. You're wrong. Am I? The witch stood up, and suddenly she was taller, more imposing. The cottage around us began to shift and change, the cozy interior becoming darker, more twisted. Let me show you what love really does, Sam Wheeler. The walls of the cottage melted away, and suddenly I was standing in a vast cavern lined with mirrors. But these weren't ordinary mirrors. Each one showed a different scene, a different moment in time. In one mirror, I saw a young woman who looked like Hannah but older, crying over a stack of rejection letters from graduate schools. In another, I saw the same woman, middle-aged now, sitting alone in a small apartment, staring at her phone and waiting for a call that never came. In a third, I saw an elderly woman who might have been Hannah, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by family members who looked bored and impatient to leave. "This is what I saved her from," the witch said, her voice echoing in the cavern. "This is the future that awaited Hannah Williams. Disappointment, loneliness, and a slow descent into irrelevance." But then I saw something the witch clearly hadn't intended to show me. In a mirror near the back of the cavern, I caught a glimpse of the real Hannah. Not the child version playing in the garden, but the 21-year-old college student. She was trapped in what looked like a glass cage, fully aware and screaming silently, watching helplessly as the child version of herself played among the flowers. The witch had been lying. Hannah wasn't happy and innocent and carefree. She was still herself, still aware, still desperate to escape. The little girl in the garden was just a shell, a puppet being controlled while the real Hannah suffered in supernatural captivity. "You're not saving them," I said, pointing at the mirror that showed the real Hannah. "You're torturing them." The witch followed my gaze and realized what I'd seen. Her expression changed, becoming ugly and predatory. "You weren't supposed to see that. No one ever sees that. Let her go. Let all of them go." "I don't think so." The witch raised her hand and I felt an invisible force slam into me, knocking me backward. "I think instead I'll add you to my collection." A naive young man, frozen forever at 26, never having to face the disappointments that await him in life. I hit the cavern wall hard, and my pocket knife went skittering across the stone floor. But as it slid away from me, the steel blade struck one of the mirrors, shattering it completely. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The broken mirror released a sound like a woman screaming, and suddenly the entire cavern was shaking. Cracks appeared in the other mirrors, spreading like spider webs across their surfaces. "What have you done?" the witch shrieked. I didn't answer. I rolled to my feet and grabbed my knife, then started smashing every mirror I could reach. Each one that shattered released another scream, another shockwave that made the cavern shake harder. The witch lunged at me, her fingernails extending into claws, her face becoming something inhuman and monstrous. But I'd grown up in Trenton, and I'd learned early how to fight dirty when I had to. I drove my shoulder into her midsection, knocking her backward, then slashed at her with the steel blade. The knife cut across her arm, and where it touched her, her skin began to smoke and burn. "Iron," she hissed, clutching her wounded arm. "You little bastard." I kept smashing mirrors, and with each one that broke, the witch seemed to become weaker, more human. The cavern was starting to collapse around us, chunks of stone falling from the ceiling. But I didn't care. I had to break them all. I had to free Hannah and all the other children. When I shattered the last mirror, the one that had shown the real Hannah trapped in her glass cage, the witch let out a scream that nearly burst my eardrums. Then she collapsed to her knees, aging rapidly. Her hair turning white, her skin becoming wrinkled and spotted. "Centuries," she gasped. "I've been collecting them for centuries. You don't understand what you've done." The cavern was falling apart now, huge pieces of the ceiling crashing down around us. But through the chaos I could hear something wonderful. The sound of children's voices, real children's voices, calling out in confusion and fear as they remembered who they were. I ran toward the sound, dodging falling stones, and burst out of the collapsing cavern into the witch's garden. But the garden was changing too, the impossible flowers withering, the magical trees becoming ordinary pines and oaks. And standing among the dying flowers, looking around in bewilderment, were a dozen children of various ages, all wearing clothing from different time periods, all blinking in confusion as their memories returned. But there, standing at the edge of the garden and looking exactly like the photo her parents had shown me, was Hannah Williams, 21 years old, brown hair, brown eyes, and very much alive. "Hannah!" I called out, running toward her. She turned at the sound of her name, and when she saw me, a stranger in a ranger uniform, her face lit up with relief and hope. Are you here to help us?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," I said, reaching into my pocket for the pieces of her grandmother's cross. "My name is Sam Wheeler. I'm a forest ranger, and your parents sent me to find you." When I placed the broken cross in her hands, Hannah Williams began to cry. Not tears of sadness, but tears of joy and relief and gratitude. "My parents," she whispered. "Are they okay? I've been..." God, how long have I been gone? 3 days. And they're not just okay. They're going crazy with worry and love for you. Behind us, the witch's cottage was collapsing in on itself, returning to whatever reality it had existed in before she'd bent the forest to her will. But the other children were gathering around us, looking to me for guidance and protection. Some of them had been missing for decades. A few looked like they'd been taken in the 1800s based on their clothing. They were all confused, all frightened, all desperate to go home to families who might not even be alive anymore. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, my job was to get Hannah Williams back to her parents. I used Hannah's GPS unit, which had started working again the moment the witch died, to navigate back to her campsite. It took us 2 hours, moving slowly because some of the younger children were having trouble with the rough terrain, but we made it just as the moon was rising. I used my satellite phone to call the ranger station, and for the first time in 3 days, I got a clear signal. Pine Barrens Ranger Station, this is Martinez. Martinez, thank God, this is Sam. I need immediate assistance at the Ong's Hat camping area. Multiple missing persons recovered. Medical attention needed. Sam? Jesus. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Your radio's been dead. What the hell is going on out there? I looked around at the group of children huddled near Hannah's tent, at Hannah herself sitting by my campfire and clutching the broken pieces of her grandmother's cross, and I tried to figure out how to explain what had happened. It's a long story, I said finally, but I need you to call the Williams family and tell them I'm bringing their daughter home. 3 hours later, I watched Hannah Williams run into her parents' arms in the parking lot of the ranger station. Carol Williams was sobbing so hard she could barely speak, just holding her daughter and saying, my baby, over and over again. David Williams was trying to be strong, but tears were streaming down his face as he wrapped both his wife and daughter in his arms. The twins, Jake and Josh, had fallen asleep in the back seat of their parents' car during the long wait, but they woke up when they heard their sister's voice. The look on their faces when they saw Hannah, pure joy and relief and love, was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Hannah! They shouted in unison, throwing themselves at their big sister. We made you birthday cards. We've been so scared. Hannah knelt down to hug her brothers, and I saw her look over their heads at her parents. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I worried you. Don't you ever apologize for this, Carol said fiercely. This wasn't your fault. You have nothing to be sorry for. We thought we'd lost you, David added, his voice breaking. We thought, Jesus, Hannah, we thought you were gone forever. I almost was, Hannah said quietly, and I could see in her eyes that she remembered everything. The witch, the cottage, the years she'd spent trapped in that supernatural prison, while a puppet version of her childhood self played in an enchanted garden. She looked at me over her family's heads and mouthed the words, "Thank you." I nodded, but I couldn't speak. Watching this family reunion, seeing the pure love and joy and relief radiating from all of them, I finally understood what the witch had been talking about. This kind of love did have power. It had sustained Hannah through her captivity, guided me to her location, and given me the strength to face down a supernatural entity that had been collecting children for centuries. The other children were a more complicated situation. Some of them had been missing for so long that their families were all dead. Others were from different states, different time periods, and it was going to take weeks or months to figure out where they belonged. But that was a problem for the state police, the FBI, and social services. My job was done. I'd made a promise to a desperate family, and I'd kept it. Later that night, after all the paperwork and debriefings and medical examinations, I sat alone in the ranger station, trying to process everything that had happened. I'd started this search as a rookie, trying to prove himself, convinced that my inexperience was a liability. Instead, I'd learned that sometimes being green can save your life. An experienced ranger might have dismissed the supernatural elements, might have looked for logical explanations that didn't exist, but I'd been naive enough to believe in the impossible, and that belief had led me to Hannah Williams. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Carol Williams. Sam, I hope I'm not calling too late. I needed to thank you again. Mrs. Williams, you don't need to thank me. I was just doing my job. No, she said firmly. You did so much more than that. You brought our daughter home when everyone else said to wait and see. You believed us when we said something was wrong. You risked your own life to save a girl you'd never even met. I could hear Hannah's voice in the background talking to her brothers, and it made me smile. Mrs. Williams, can I ask you something? Of course. Hannah's cross necklace, the one that belonged to her grandmother, it got broken during whatever happened to her out there. Do you think it can be repaired? Carol was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft and warm. Sam, do you know what my mother-in-law used to say about that cross? No, ma'am. She said it wasn't the wood that protected you. It was the love of the people who gave it to you. Hannah's cross could be broken into 1,000 pieces, and it would still protect her, because it carries our love with it. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking about love and protection and the strange, wonderful things that can happen when desperate people refuse to give up on each other. I'd gone into the Pine Barrens as a rookie ranger trying to prove himself. I came out as someone who understood that the most powerful force in the world isn't supernatural at all. It's the love of a family that refuses to let go. My name is Sam Wheeler. And that's the story of how I learned that evil ain't always human, but love is always stronger than darkness. I've been a ranger for 15 years now, and I've handled dozens of missing person cases since then. But I've never forgotten the lesson I learned in those haunted woods. When someone loves you enough, there's no force on earth, natural or supernatural, that can keep you lost forever. Hannah Williams graduated from Rutgers the following spring with a degree in environmental science, just like she'd planned. She's working for the National Park Service now, protecting the same forests where she was once trapped. Her parents finally had their wedding ceremony, and yes, Hannah walked her mother down the aisle wearing a bright yellow dress that made everyone think of sunshine. The twins are in college now, studying to be forest rangers like their hero Sam Wheeler, though I keep telling them there are easier ways to make a living. And sometimes on quiet autumn evenings when the mist rises from the Pine Barrens and the forest seems full of possibilities, I remember that desperate phone call from a mother who refused to give up on her daughter. I remember the power of love, and I'm grateful I was naive enough to believe in it.